in the depths of depression, you've become the dark. So there's no difference between you and the darkness. There's no negotiating it. It just is what it is. The only choice you have is, and it's not even a choice. You either endure or you don't. I've often said I can't imagine a sadder way to die than dying with a sense that in all the years I had on earth, I never showed up as my true self with both my light and my shadow. I feel myself to be part of this sort of this vast chain of being, this vast network of life, which is not only human life, but the life of the natural world in which we're all embedded. And it sort of sneaks up on us with meanings that are never, fully comprehensible, but that somehow hint at the vastness of possibilities that we need to walk around respectfully as a mystery to be seen and to be observed and to be given a deep bow. The opposite of an ordinary fact is a lie. The opposite of one profound truth may be another profound truth. When that paradox comes apart, solitude devolves into loneliness, isolation, and community devolves into the crowd. And what we have going on in the United States right now is a lot of lonely people who have joined together in crowds that become mobs. Let the person who cannot be alone beware of being in community, and let the person who cannot be in community beware of being alone. The epigraph to that book by Thomas Merton is his statement as follows. I am traveling toward my destiny in the belly of a paradox, playing on Jonah. There was something in me that said, you're at a turning with this. What you need to understand is that you've plowed plenty. You've plowed enough and more than enough. You're not going to get any farther by harrowing yourself. So, that wasn't an instant turnaround in my depression, but it gave me an image that sort of holds the mystery of when to say enough and when to take that step forward in faith that there's something worth stepping toward.
Hey everyone, welcome to Love and Philosophy. This is Andrea Hiott, and this episode is with Parker Palmer, who is the founder of the Center for Courage and Renewal, which is located in Greenville, South Carolina, which is a city very close to my heart. And maybe that's one of the reasons I connect so deeply with Parker, although I think there are many reasons, including the 10 books that he has written, in which I highly suggest you have a look at. Because just by looking at the different titles, I imagine you might find something that's very helpful to you today. Some of the ones we talk about here are A Hidden Wholeness, On the Brink of Everything, The Courage to Teach, and many more. This conversation, I was really emotional to have this conversation throughout the entire conversation. And by emotional, I mean in a positive way. I felt very alive, sort of raw, at the edge of myself, which is why I start the conversation talking about On the Brink, which is one of his books that he wrote when he was 80 years old. And this idea of being on the brink of everything really means something powerful to me at this time. I mentioned a Kurt Vonnegut quote when Parker and I are talking because Parker uses it in one of his books, the book On the Brink. And I went and found that quote and I want to read it to you. And here it is. I want to stay as close to the edge as I can without going over. Out on the edge, you see all kinds of things you can't see from the center. End of the quote. And that's from a 1952 novel called Player Piano. In any case, this idea of the edge and the brink is very important. These ideas of personal, collective, planetary brinks that we've been walking on towards what's beyond them, because there's always something beyond them, and how might old ways of being no longer serve us, what ways of being do still serve us. One thing about Parker is he doesn't try to solve everything. I don't know if you heard the conversation I had about nature and bioregionalism recently, but one of the things in that conversation that meant a lot to me was understanding we can tend to and care for rather than try and solve. And that's a message Parker's been writing about for a long time. He tries to show how we can embrace these sides rather than try and solve them. And that's, as you've probably heard me say many times, what I mean by beyond dichotomy is not to solve one side by the other side or for the one side to win against the other side, but for us to somehow let the sides be what they are. And that's what Palmer's work tries to do. He's, let the confusion and the clarity and the sorrow and the joy and the silence and the conversation and the fear and the possibility and the poetry and the horror all sort of be there and notice them. And it's very hard. I mean, he talks about that too, about it will break your heart open to do this, to be present and be alive and feel it. But he also talks about paradox, which is one thing that has always drawn me to his work, though I had no idea his first book had paradox in the title, as you'll hear us talk about. But he talks about paradox as a survival concept. I can hardly think of a more important sentence right now than that paradox is a survival concept, because I really believe that holding paradox and understanding things we've thought of as opposites or as either or in a different way is the key that we're all in many different ways, many different fields, many different areas of life trying to figure out right now. And it's why everything feels so tense and so hard and so transformative all at once. Parker talks about soul and role in the undivided life and how we can live into our soul. I don't want to talk too much before this conversation. I really just want to let it be what it is. But one thing that really means a lot to me is where we get to at the end, because as you'll hear, he talks about his depression and some very difficult times and how when you are in certain places, you cannot feel love. He says something about perhaps he was still being held by the love, even though he could not feel it. That idea, the idea that paradox might be a survival concept and that we might be being held by love even when we cannot feel it, those are two sentences that feel really important to me that I want to speak again here before we go into this. There will be another greening season. That also comes to me now as I think about this poem that sort of spontaneously comes in this conversation and the cyclical nature of renewal, but never coming back to the same place where we started. So we're going to know it for the first time, but it's going to be a different place. I think Parker might also say it here, but he does quote Ram Dass sometimes of we're all walking each other home. That is what this conversation felt like to me in some way that I don't understand yet at all. So I just want to leave it and let it be what it is and send it out to you with gratitude. The sentence that came to me after I had this conversation was, just listen, Andrea. Listen and have compassion for everyone you meet. And that's what I want to try to do. And that's what I hope that we can all do today in some form or another. It's not a weakness, it's a real power, and it's a survival. It's a way of surviving, and it's a way of flourishing, and it's a way of finding worlds we didn't imagine could be there. I really believe that. That's why I'm doing all of this. And thanks for listening and for helping me do this and being part of it. It really means a lot. Okay. So, hi, Parker. It's such an honor to have you on Love and Philosophy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Andrea. Delighted to be with you.
So your work has meant so much to me and to many others around me, so it's going to be hard to even talk about it all in 1 hour, but I thought maybe we'd start on the Brink. On the Brink of Everything is a book that you've published. Was it in 2019? Sometime.
18, right?
18.
Mm-hmm.
And this phrase, on the brink of everything, I think can lead us into a lot of places, especially today. But just to start, what does that mean for you?
Well, as you know, Andrea, in the book, I tell the story of how the title came to me from a young writer I much admire, half my age, Courtney Martin, who had written an essay about her then, I think, 3-year-old daughter, Maya, who, as a toddler, was, discovering the world with every step and every movement and every new experience. And Courtney wrote about how Maya was uh, visibly and audibly and bodily on the brink of everything, just full of the excitement of discovery and learning the world anew every day. Um, it, and I was 80 at the time that I wrote the book, or close to it, and 86 now. And it just struck me that I too, at the other end of the life span, found myself on the brink of everything, looking at the world through the eyes now of age and a lot of experience, but really devoted, as best I know how, to the Buddhist idea of beginner's mind and trying to see things anew and not get stuck, as so many elders do, in sort of bemoaning the passage of time or becoming frozen in their perception of how things are and often how things ought to be, which is, of course, the way they used to be, not the way they are now. I didn't want to step into that trap. I don't think it's at all necessary. So the title contained a lot of energy for me about how I want to live out my elder years, and it all came from Courtney Martin and her 3-year-old daughter Maya.
You found a lot of inspiration in youth or in those who are at different parts of life than you. How has a conversation between generations been important for you?
Well, it's because younger generations, and there are several of them, of course, when you're 86, um, stand at a different point of human experience than you do. And they look at things differently, they understand things differently. Um, from my point of view, they may lack a certain experience that would help them reframe things. And when I see that as a possibility, I'm always glad to be in dialogue with them about how that same thing looks to me, um, how today looks to me in the world, for example, as one who has lived through a lot of apocalyptic moments in US and world history. But before I ever get to sharing my experience with them, I listen carefully for their experience because they're looking at a horizon that I can't see so clearly or well as they can. But it's the same horizon that's coming at me. And I need their eyes, I need their voices uh, to help me see how it looks through the lens of someone whose experience is relatively fresh and new as of today, so that I don't get stuck in yesterday.
I think you use a Kurt Vonnegut quote about things looking different on the brink or at the edge relative to the center. And as you were just saying that, I was thinking how I'm almost too nervous to talk to you because I so want to know what it's like for you right now. And I feel a little nervous to even ask things so personally. So I just want to say that because I feel like I need to say it. And within that is that I'm really wondering how things look from where you are now in that Kurt Vonnegut sense. And I mean that in terms of age, of course, where you are in your life, but even today and how you're feeling. And I would just really love to hear that, an expression of how things really feel for you today, if it's okay to ask that.
Well, absolutely. And please feel totally free to ask those more personal questions. As you know, I've written about deeply personal experiences, such as my several bouts with clinical depression over the course of the years. And I find it very valuable, to show up in the world as I am, as fully and honestly as I possibly can. I've often said I can't imagine a sadder way to die than dying with a sense that in all the years I had on earth, I never showed up as my true self, with both my light and my shadow. So today, in the midst of the political, economic, ecological, societal calamities that seem to be engulfing the U.S. and the rest of the world, I go back and forth between the shadow and the light. I have days when it's really hard uh, to get up and um, and feel energy to pursue the work that I feel I need to be doing as a writer, because I still feel very much called um, to using my writing as a way to shed light if possible, but also to be honest about the darkness of the times that we're in. And there are days when it's just very difficult to sit down at the keyboard and feel as if those words might make any difference to anybody. Um, I think where I always come down um, when it feels like, what difference could this possibly make, is to realize once again, beginner's mind, realize all over again that it makes a difference to me. What makes a difference is the feeling of continuing to be engaged with the world, with my gifts and the best of the light I have to offer, and honesty about my own shadow. Because in the past, that impulse to do what feels whole and true and honest and full of integrity to me has been what's animated all of the work I've done, not only the writing, but the founding 30 years ago of the Center for Courage and Renewal, and the work it's doing across this country and around the world, helping people, in my catchphrase anyway, to rejoin soul and role, to bring their identity and integrity more fully into the world, into their personal lives and into their vocational lives and into their public and political lives, because I think we need a whole lot of human identity and integrity and to reassert itself in a world where the identity and integrity of so many people is being trampled on and disowned and dismissed. So that, when language of that sort um, reasonably well describes the work that you've been doing for many years and the work you'd like to continue to do, um, that sets a pretty high bar for for getting up each morning and trying to practice what you preach.
Yes, and it's meant a lot. It still means a lot. It will continue to mean a lot. Even your Substack is meaning so much. And so you're reaching so many people from that, writing as you do. And that brings up gratitude. And part of what you've said in your books is that part of this feeling alive and staying in this place that you just described is also that you have a sense of gratitude that you are still alive after all you've faced. Is that part of how you find this way to continue helping all others too, and help yourself, of course, in the way you said? But
Yeah, very, very much so, Andrea. I think, if you're not grateful for a life like mine, which in which you've not only been able to survive some deep darkness, but also find yourself thriving on the other side. If you're not grateful for um, the opportunities that you've been able to make use of your own privilege. So the privilege is structural and it's not what I would choose. I would much rather have a society where the distinctions between those with and without privilege are pretty close to eliminated. Uh, but when you do have privilege, the question is, are you going to use it uh, for anyone else's good? Or are you just going to, enjoy it yourself as if you had earned it? So I'm grateful for all of those forces in my life which have said, in regards to my own privilege as a straight white male, well-educated, reasonably well-off person, this just came to you for historic reasons that are fundamentally unjust reasons. So, no, I'm not grateful for that, but I'm grateful for the fact that I got some great help along the way in using that privilege on behalf of other people. So when you put it all together, both that which, I have had help to understand and that which I've worked hard to achieve, and the simple fact that the gene pool from which I come has allowed me to have this many years on Earth. What's not to be grateful for? It seems like ingratitude would be really gross at this point in life and very, very unseemly and sort of not worthy of a grown-up, right?
Yes. Do you still feel that sort of gratitude that I feel in your books? Gratitude just to like walk in the Douglas firs, and gratitude that feel life. I'm thinking of, maybe we can go into it a little bit, the some of the struggles that you've had and that you've written about and that have been helpful, just because you've, as you said, just stated where you are right now in that moment, which is so hard to do. You mentioned the roles and the soul, and in the undivided life, and elsewhere, you help us understand how we can be ourselves and what the soul is. And I wonder how you see that in connection to your life, but the life that you are part of, and are feeling, because that connects too, I think, to why we still want to write and leave these messages for future generations.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I do. I feel myself, and this is a feeling that wasn't sort of native to me at first. But as the years have gone by, it's grown in me. I feel myself to be part of this vast chain of being, this vast network of life, which is not only human life, but the life of the natural world in which we're all embedded. And I think unconsciously, even before I had that personal bodily awareness of connectedness with this largeness, um, I was using metaphors from the natural world. For example, the metaphors of the four seasons that I used to frame the retreat work that we do at the Center for Courage and Renewal, where we explore what it means that a human life gets lived through, metaphorically, through the seasons of fall, winter, spring, and summer, in ways we can track very directly. And of course we do, because we are creatures of that world. Those aren't just seasons in the woods or the mountains or the desert or the across the waters. These are seasons of our lives. So, even before I had a consciousness of being joined with all of that, I was drawing on those metaphors out of some instinct that this is true. And if we can touch that bedrock truth, as we began doing 30 years ago at the Center for Courage and Renewal, we can frame the search for meaning and purpose in life in a way that accommodates a huge range of philosophical convictions, religious beliefs, and world views, which has always been my intent. I've never been a person who thought, okay, my particular way of looking at the world has it all wrapped up, and I don't want to hear about others. I've always seen wisdom traditions, spiritual traditions, religious traditions as just one turn of the prism. But when you turn it again, the light gets refracted in another way, and it's the sort of totality, the there's a word here that I'm losing or lost for the moment. I'll get back to it.
It's
The
fine.
holographic, the
Hmm.
holographic principle
Oh.
that, in the microcosm, you can see the macrocosm.
Mm.
And if you keep turning and looking for those microcosmic instances of a larger view of things, you can begin to put together something that doesn't that never exhausts the truth of the whole, which is inexhaustible and ultimately a mystery. But you can come into a deeper appreciation of the vastness of that in which you're embedded. I even wrote a poem about this called Everything Falls Away that maybe at some point I could read. I think I can find it here on
Oh,
my
I would love
hard
that.
drive. Yeah.
I noticed, and I mean, it's of course I noticed because you write poetry in in the book we already discussed, and poetry comes up often, and it's very important for me too. That I just want to notice that's a very important source too, isn't it, of connection to life? Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's good to know that you're a fellow poetry lover,
Mm-hmm.
because that's such an important lens for me. The poets are just kind of remarkable. Well, just flat out remarkable. What they pick up out of the corner of their eye and then somehow communicate to us. Emily Dickinson has a great line that I've always loved. She says, "Tell the truth, but tell it slant." Because if you try to run headlong at it, it'll blind you, and you'll be wiped out. But if you tell it slant, the way astronomers say if you're not using a telescope, there are some heavenly bodies that you can only catch out of the corner of your eye because the receptors there are more sensitive to light that you cannot see if you look headlong at it. Um, I love the fact that poetry tells the truth but tells it slant. And it sort of sneaks up on us with meanings that are never, fully comprehensible, but that somehow hint at the vastness of possibilities that we need to walk around respectfully as a mystery to be seen and to be observed and to be given a deep bow while still, remaining curious. What is that and what's it all about? Um, and I think that curiosity is a huge energy for life that somehow the poets manage to capture with very few words.
Yes, and that what you were just saying makes me think about other parts of your work that I love so much. And I know that's been important for you, the idea of paradox and living the tension, and even I think you've talked about writing the contradiction, or writing like WRITING, and poetry does that in a very special way. But I want to put that word out there as I want to talk about it with you, paradox, and hear what your feelings are of it. But also before as you were talking, I was remembering there's so much nature even early on in the sunrise, the sunset, but also wildness. This word wildness that I remember you using when you were in deep depression. I think you said it showed it to it showed the wildness of the world to you or something like that. So I just want to put those two things there, and you can go wherever you want with them, but they both came up as you were talking about poetry.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and I think those are very insightful connections that you're making that actually help me think about my own work in a new way. So I'll try to keep them both in mind, but let me start with the wild piece, or perhaps original wildness that I sometimes maybe have talked about. So I've often said about depression, um, the kind that I've experienced on three occasions in my life, deep dives into months of debilitating clinical depression. It's not like being lost in the dark, because if you're lost in the dark, there's a difference between you and the darkness. And you can imagine yourself in a dark room, still there as someone separate from the darkness, able to grope around, maybe find a shade to pull up or a switch to turn on a light or a little opening somewhere somehow. If you're just lost in the dark, you can somehow negotiate the dark. But in the depths of depression, you've become the dark. So there's no difference between you and the darkness. And this, there's no negotiating it. It just is what it is. And the only choice you have is, and it's not even a choice. You either endure or you don't. But it was under those circumstances that I was sometimes, after a lot of enduring, able to see a tiny, tiny, tiny possible spark of life deep, deep in that darkness, distant from me, but there, a kind of micro reminder of a possibility that I'd almost forgotten about, which is the possibility to live again. And I came to liken that in a rough metaphor of being lost in a very dark wood, but finding back in the thickets, the far thickets of that wood, this thing called the soul, which sort of came to me as a wild animal, um, that original wildness of the human soul, which uh, which is able to survive on hardly any resources at all, as wild animals do. And it somehow was, calling me to reconnect with that original wildness and feel again that pulse of life, that possibility of life, over against all of that in me, which said, there's no life left for you. And so do the obvious, uh, get it over with. And that became, not instantly curative, but it became a source of hope. And so in some way, I think that connects back to the other piece that you mentioned, Andrea, which is the notion of paradox. Paradox is something that the power of paradox, the importance of paradox came to me very early in my career as a writer, and earlier still in my own personal journey to understand what life was all about and how to frame it in a way that opened possibilities. In fact, my very first book was titled "The Promise of Paradox," um, and
How have I missed this? Oh my goodness. Whoa, that's very exciting for me actually. There's a book I didn't know. Sorry, but that's now I
no,
have
not
something to find.
Not at all. You obviously know the other books well,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that. And yeah, The Promise of Paradox, excuse me, was published in 79 or 80. And
Oh,
it was really stimulated by um, the reading I was doing at the time in Thomas Merton, the great Trappist monk and mystic who also became patron saint of folks in the civil rights movement and in the peace movement of the mid 20th century. Really remarkable guy who spanned two worlds.
didn't he say the undivided life, or maybe it was hidden wholeness or something that you talk about a lot? But I feel like there's a paradox there, or a kind of holding of contradiction in some of his words that you have
Yeah,
used quite
yeah,
often. Yeah.
exactly. You're right. He was the originator of the phrase a hidden wholeness. Um, but earlier than that, what sparked me was a journal he wrote called The Sign of Jonas, based on, bouncing off of the book of Jonah in the Bible. The epigraph to that book um, by Thomas Merton is his statement as follows: I am traveling toward my destiny in the belly of a paradox,
Oh, wow.
playing on Jonah traveling in the belly of a
That's
whale.
wonderful.
And
Wow.
I thought, wow, that's it. So I started, opening myself to understandings of paradox. And I think for me, a breakthrough was reading um, about the great Nobel Prize winning physicist Niels Bohr, um, who once said, and he was such an interesting guy in himself. He once said, I mean, one of the reasons that I found him so interesting was that there was this story about how he had visitors in his lab one day, this Nobel Prize winning fellow, and somebody noticed that there was a horseshoe hung on the wall over his work table. And they said, well, Dr. Bohr, you're a great physicist. Surely you don't believe that horseshoes bring good luck. And he said, his response was, oh, no, I don't believe that at all, but they say it works whether you believe it or not. So I just loved the looseness of that mind and that imagination and that humor. Um, so he said, yeah, Niels, this was the phrase that really opened my mind. He said, uh, the opposite of an ordinary fact is a lie, but the opposite of one profound truth may be another profound truth. And I loved that understanding of paradox, partly because he says it may be, right? There's discernment involved here. But I got to thinking about human realities that might fit that that sort of formula of one profound truth being the opposite of another profound truth. And of course, the bodily piece that came to me pretty quickly was, well, breathing in and breathing out is a paradox in that sense. We need both, And if I were to say to you, I've decided I'm basically a kind of breathing out kind of guy. So that's all I'm going to do from here on out. Yeah, we'd be, we'd be
Oh, that's
saying
funny.
goodbye to each other. That's just not the way things work at that level of reality. But similarly, I can construct uh, a statement like this. Is the human self made for community? Absolutely. No question about it. We come from community, we're sustained by community, we return to community. Is the human self made for solitude? Absolutely. No question about it. We all have to come to terms with ourselves and what's going on inside of us and embrace ourselves in a way that no one else can embrace. And we all have a solitary journey to make from life to death, which no one can accompany us on, no matter how well we've been accompanied in earlier journeys of our life. So I got to thinking how right on target Niels Bohr was, with that notion of one profound truth may be the opposite of another profound truth.
That's beautiful, and it relates very much to what we were discussing about the brink, but also this wildness. That moment when you were really depressed, I'm not sure which of the episodes it was when the wildness came, maybe the first. In any case, that feeling, being the darkness, as you express it so well, I remember you wrote about it as being in the dark, and then you sort of realized, no, you are the darkness. When you're in that place, there's no real way to describe it or whatever. Actually, it's funny because what you're talking about with the individual and the community. I was just with a group of philosophers. I don't know if you know the philosophers of like embodied cognition and activism, and this idea of what is a self, is a relation, and so on. And we were talking about how at the same time that that's so true, there's something in you that is so individual and so unique, and maybe you're even here to express it. Or I'm sort of I'm saying that, but that can go the other way too. Like when you're depressed or when you're in pain, and there's something that's so only individual that you can't express. And I guess I'm trying to see how how do you understand or hold that paradox of the self being relation and the self being so sometimes painfully unexpressible.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it takes us and it could take us in so many different directions. And of course, the philosophers like you are still working on it because it's one of those. I don't know. It's one of those questions that Rilke wrote about. Questions we can't answer. Questions we just have to live in hopes that some distant day, he said, we might live our way into an answer, which sometimes does happen
Is that
over
what
time.
happened when you were seeing the light in the way you described it? When you are the darkness, but the light comes? How is that possible?
It's such an interesting conundrum. Let me quote. You know, we get along with a little help from our friends, and I've tried to read uh, friends, as it were, who be intellectual, spiritual, philosophical friends. Dietrich Bonhoeffer,
Mm.
the um, great German pastor who found the courage to stand up against Hitler, for which he paid with his life. Um, he wrote a book called Life Together, which is about community, and it's one of those books that I've trusted deeply because if you know the story of Bonhoeffer building community under the Third Reich, um, underground community, resistance community, community that put people at great risk, you really think, okay, this guy has a right to talk about community, um, and I should pay attention to what he says. One of the things he says in his book Life Together, it goes like this, and Niels Bohr would have approved, I think. Bonhoeffer says, let the person who cannot be alone beware of being in community, and let the person who cannot be in community beware of being alone. And I think there's just a deep wisdom in the way he puts that particular paradox, because
Mm.
when a paradox falls apart, when you don't hold these life-giving poles in creative tension with each other, community, solitude, back and forth, what I sometimes call life on the Möbius Strip, um, co-creating each other as you go. When that paradox comes apart, solitude devolves into loneliness, isolation, and community devolves into the crowd. And, you know, what we have going on in the United States right now is a lot of lonely people who have joined together in crowds that become mobs, that become Third Reich kinds of mobs. And it's not good, to say the obvious. Um, but when that paradox is held together and people in community understand what it means to protect and nurture their own solitude, and people in solitude understand that their need for community and the availability of community, the whole dynamic becomes very life-giving. So it's that mutual resourcefulness, and again, that life on the Möbius strip, where you can't really distinguish between the two because they keep co-creating each other
Mm.
as you travel the Möbius strip.
It's one of those phrases I think of a lot about because a lot of this is being able to become aware of that and to hold life in that way, to understand that when things are happening, it's a whole different way of thinking, which, and then as you were talking, I think somewhere you even say paradise is a sort of paradox is a sort of survival concept. It's about surviving. And I wonder if that relates to, if it even can relate to when we're really sick, when we are in those moments. Can we still hold that paradox there? I know you don't have an answer for how you've gotten through all these hard moments exactly, but
Well, one of the first things that comes to me is the work of Carl Jung, who's been another um, influential thinker in my life. And Jung was very big on saying that that uh, that the cure is in the disease, so that we make a mistake if we simply try to eliminate the symptoms of the disease.
mm,
The secret is to go deeply into the disease to find the cure, um,
mm,
which is a big paradox. Um, that that Western medicine generally tends to ignore or roll right over. Um, we are involved in the symptom relief business. So the whole metaphor, the whole medical metaphor is take a pill or undergo a surgery that just gets rid of the symptoms without looking deeply at the disease for its sources, in which there will also be a cure. I mean, that applies more directly to psychological and spiritual pathologies than it may to physical pathologies, but I don't think that that they're altogether different. Um, Medicine in Western, even in Western medicine and in Western medical schools these days, there is a recognition that mind, body, spirit healing is a real thing, and that there are things that allopathic physicians can do to invoke the mind and the spirit as they work with the body that actually enhance healing as determined by laboratory studies and observations. So I'm just, for me, um, how to put this, as you know, this is such subtle stuff,
yeah.
and language is sometimes not subtle enough to really express it well. But there's something for me about working my way through depression, that has to do with respecting the mystery of depression and walking around it with that respect rather than demanding an analytic understanding that will fix me, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So so once I let go of of that of that sort of empiricist demand,
mm-hmm.
I want an analysis, I want an answer, I want a pill or whatever that will fix this thing. And I'm not speaking against medication. Some people need medication. I needed it for a while. I haven't needed to stay on it. So if that's what you need, please do it. But it seems to me that a posture of respectfully walking around a mystery is more likely to lead to healing than not. I do have a poem that I think I've memorized. I'll see if I can. It's a
Please.
fairly brief poem. I think I can quote it from memory. That has to
Wow.
do with a moment, with a curative moment, I guess is what I'd call it, Andrea, um, with regards my depression. and maybe it will speak a little bit to this idea of holding the mystery without demanding a fix. So this was based on an experience I had, and I think I was probably halfway through or a little more of the way through one depression when I decided I had enough energy to take a trip out into the country in another state, into a rural area where there was a community of Roman Catholic sisters, one of whom I had gotten to know earlier in life, who was a very trustworthy conversation partner, a deeply empathetic and understanding person with whom I could speak about my depression, maybe an hour or two a day. Meanwhile, just um, rest at this retreat center, this religious retreat center in the middle of this farmland. It happened to be in Kentucky. And one day, halfway through that week, I was out walking down a country road where there were farm fields on both sides of the road. No human beings in sight, no buildings in sight, just acres and acres of farmland, which had recently been plowed, a stage of plowing that farmers call harrowing. A disc harrow is dragged through the fields to bust up the earth prior to finer plowing and prior to planting. And I was suddenly struck with, I have enough of a farm background to know that I was looking at harrowed fields. And I was suddenly struck with the multiple meanings of that word.
Yeah.
I was feeling harrowed myself,
Mm-hmm.
and here were these harrowed fields. So a poem began to emerge, which I worked on over the rest of the week while I was there. But a lot of it came to me just out walking, and I'll see if I can get it by memory. Probably would help if I close my eyes. So I
Yeah, I
will
was
do
gonna
that.
close mine too. So that's kind of yeah.
Called harrowing. The plow has savaged this sweet field, misshapen clods of earth kicked up, rocks and twisted roots exposed to view, last year's growth demolished by the blade. I have plowed my life this way, turned over a whole history looking for the roots of what went wrong, until my face is ravaged, furrowed, scarred. Enough. The job is done. Whatever's been uprooted, let it be seedbed for the growing that's to come. I plowed to unearth last year's reasons. The farmer plows to plant a greening season.
Wow.
And that poem, I've sometimes felt like the most important line of poetry I've ever written was that single word, enough.
Hmm.
That there was something in me that said, you know, you're at a turning with this. What you need to understand is that you've plowed plenty. You've plowed enough and more than enough. You're not going to get any farther by harrowing yourself. So, that wasn't an instant turnaround in my depression, but it gave me an image that sort of holds the mystery of when to say enough and when to take that step forward in faith that there's something worth stepping toward.
Thank you so much for reading that. I think that will be very important to a lot of people who hear it. It was important to me, and to hear you read it like that. And it made me think of the roles and the soul, and it's soul and soil. Um, there's a lot in there, but also I think it's so helpful to be able to hear that it's okay that enough, to, isn't that connected a bit to being your soul, letting yourself see your soul, feel your soul? Is there something about, I mean, I'm thinking of the writing process itself and how important it is in your life, and how that was kind of an expression of how the writing was a way of surviving, but also holding this paradox. And also, I don't know how to put it exactly into words, but when we think of soul and role, it how can we express that it's, for people who haven't read you yet and don't are just listening here, um, that it's okay to be the soul and the soil and the the plower too, and also to say that it's enough. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say here, but there's some connection there that I want to bring out with the soul and the role and the soil.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great kind of force field question, which is what we're really doing here, to explore a sort of force field that's hard to pin down because it can't be pinned down. But what my mind turns to when you asked that, Andrea, was the word humus, um, or earth, or that which fertilizes the seed,
Mm,
that rich compost in which the seed begins to grow. It's closely related to the word humble and humility,
mm,
and it's closely related to the word humiliation. We live in a culture that regards all of this as humiliating, right?
yes, yes.
I when I started writing and speaking publicly about my experiences of depression, which incidentally I didn't do until almost 10 years after my first experience of depression, when I felt like, okay, I can talk about this in a way that is integrated into my sense of self,
Mm,
that I'm no longer ashamed of it, I'm no longer embarrassed by it. And until that point, I wasn't ready to talk about it. And I'm glad I waited, because until it's integrated, you can't be a reliable commentator on the experience. It's still sort of other than who you are. And it's like you're reporting on an enemy rather than on a piece of your complex wholeness.
mm,
That's where I started coming up with this notion that wholeness has nothing to do with perfection. Wholeness is about embracing our brokenness as part of who we are, along with our strengths and our light. But when I first started writing about depression as this sort of, mid-career professional who was trying to establish himself as a writer and a speaker and a workshop leader, and soon to establish this nonprofit that's still going strong 30 years later, people around me said, no, 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 don't do that. That'll make people feel like you're weak. That'll make people feel like you're on the edge of collapse. Who wants to follow anybody who's on the edge of collapse? And my response to that was simply, this is who I am. And I'm no longer at a point where I feel a need to hide out about that. But people felt like that would be humiliating. Um, and of course, a lot of women will get the same advice about anything that involves emotional vulnerability. Don't go there. That would be showing weakness, and a man wouldn't do that. Well, I'm here to say men should do that. And we need, everyone who's willing and able to model what it means to live out loud in public a whole life, um, not overemphasizing or overstressing any of it. The humility, the humility that comes with one's struggles is is an essential part of what we were talking about at the very beginning of this conversation, which is beginner's mind, which is the willingness to say, uh, yeah, life is about getting up and then falling down, and then getting up and then falling down, and getting up and falling down again and getting up again. That's what it's about. And it does no good. Um, if we're interested in authentic community and relationship, it does no good to pretend that it's otherwise, because at some level, uh, even the folks who don't want to talk about this stuff realize we're faking it when we, you know, talk in an unbalanced way about who we are. I think that's one of the big problems, isn't it, of a lot of social media, is that people are presenting themselves in heroic, championing ways all the time. And there's a terrible distortion of reality for everybody.
Parker, I'm so happy that you brought that word humiliation in with the hummus, with the earth, with the soil. That's so rich in so many ways. I mean, not only in where we are right now in terms of what you said about men needing to get in touch with that and wanting to get in touch with that side of themselves, and also women. Also, I think of it in academia. This word humiliation is such, or shame is such a big, monster kind of chasing everyone around. Nobody wants to be humiliated. And yet we're all sort of always at the brink. That beginner's mind is where the best stuff comes in science or in life and anywhere. And to be there is a kind of humbling place to always be. So it makes me think about your early years and how you learned those lessons. And that's like that holding the paradox that we were talking about, that now at your where you are now, it seems so easy that you can hold this. But then here's me, like half your age, and around a lot of people right now who are really trying very, very hard to figure out how to hold what you just expressed in so many ways. We don't have to go into all of them, whether it's a man, a woman, an academic, whatever. But that feeling that you expressed, I feel like is really the thing we're trying to figure out how to hold right now, which relates
Mhm.
to the paradox and so on. But when you think about yourself, when you first went to, when you sort of set off out of academia, which also was you were told not to do, I think, in a similar way, right? Like with the
Right.
humiliation. When you think of that person who did that and where you are now and how clear in a way or calm you can be about these things, I wonder what that feeling is for you.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think it's probably worth mentioning that as soon as I put in all the hard work and the years necessary to get a PhD at the University of California, Berkeley, I looked around the world where our cities were burning because of racial injustice, and I decided that I didn't want to use my training in the social sciences in the academy, but I became a community organizer in Washington, D.C. And I did have uh, friends and colleagues who thought right away, well, that's humiliation right there. Why are you not taking one of those academic jobs that you've been offered with a great PhD from a great university?
Hmm.
And all I could ever say, Andrea, was, um, I can't not do it. Um, that there was something in me that, looking back, I would say there was something in me that said if I didn't follow that imperative of my soul, which is how it felt, to get engaged with racial injustice in this country. If I hadn't followed that, I would have paid a real price at the level of soul in years down the road. So it was tough, and it was tough for probably 15 years as things unfolded. But eventually it came together in a sense of vocation that I, at this point, clearly treasure.
And that so many treasure, I just have to say. I mean, thank goodness you were able to hear that and go with that back then.
Well,
Everything
I've
we talked
got,
about at the beginning comes from those decisions, right? That you really went a different way. I think you went to Lindisfarne, by the way, and then to the Quaker community and so on. So it was a whole other path than this. But anyway.
Yeah, I got to know a lot of the communal experiments of the 60s and 70s. That's for sure. And I have to say, Andrew, that I did none of it by myself. You know, there was always a community, either either coming together or forming around me. I mean, again, that's on the Möbius strip, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You lose some connections, you gain others because of the whatever magnetic field we have in which we attract or repel one another as life moves along. So, you know, I think really all I can say is that um, to folks who are midstream with that is just hang on and keep tracking the unfolding of your consciousness, of your feelings, of your sense of self as time goes by, and find a path that allows you to feel, I guess the phrase I want to use is more and more at home in your own skin and more at home on the face of the earth. Um, for all its complexities, still a good place to be. And I think the desire to feel at home in who we are and in who we are and in whose we are, the two great questions, who am I and whose am I in community. I think that the desire to feel at home in both those regards runs very deep, and just keep your eye on it. And you know, take your temperature on a regular basis on both of those counts and make those mid-course corrections that you need to make. There's no one size fits all. That's for sure. I know people. I had colleagues at Berkeley who, unlike me, stayed in academic life. And I'm glad they did because they made a great contribution, a transformative contribution from the inside that I couldn't have made. My work as a writer eventually brought me back to the academy, writing about the academy. I've not in terms of employment. I've worked largely independently for 40 years, but I wrote about and spoke about and agitated for education reform in a way that brought me back to the academy. So even that um, piece of the Möbius strip, you know, returned me to where I thought I'd left.
Courage to teach. We were going to talk about
Courage to
that, but
teach.
another
Yeah,
time.
yeah, yeah. So I just say some physicians will talk about the tincture of time as as remedy, you know, and I think it's true. I think if you stay alert and aware and make those mid-course decisions that may feel risky but also feel true.
I wonder about this word love. And as you're talking about community, by the way, thank you for saying that about academia, because I don't think it's that you have to leave academia. It's more what we're talking about of getting to that clarity, that holding that place wherever you are, whichever, and then you can see which path feels like the one you can't not do, as you so well expressed it. But how does love come into this for you, just to kind of go out of this? I know somewhere you wrote somewhere at the beginning you were asking, how can I love, my family? How can I love my job? Like that was a question I think for you earlier in those years that we're talking about, and how would this communion and community, and one of the philosophers I was just with, Hannah de Jager, writes about loving and knowing being sort of really close together in a way we were holding there. And she said something to me, and she gave me permission to say it, but just this past week we were at a conference or at a science thing, and we were talking about depression, and she's felt it, and she said there's a place you go where there's no love anymore, and it reminded me of what you said about what you just said, where you become the darkness. I just want to put that there and see what you think about that, because I find it very hard. I'm thinking about love a lot, and love is really hard. It's that humus, that earth, soil, soul, humiliation, all of that too. So I just want to put that there before we go and see, if you have any experiences about love that you want to share, or just whatever might come up as I say all of this.
Yeah, yeah. Well, first of all, let me say I think your friend and colleague is exactly right that you do go to a place in deep depression where there is no love, and you can't imagine that there ever was or will be. Um, and yet, on the other side, I have to say that one of the things I glance at out of the corner of my eye is the possibility that maybe even in that deep darkness, I was somehow held by a love I couldn't feel. Because in depression, you
Mm,
can't feel anything. Depression isn't sadness, it's the deadening of
mm,
all your emotions.
yeah.
Um, so, yes, to what your friend and colleague said, um, it it seems to me that there's such a continuum of kinds of love that it's a hard thing to talk about under one rubric. At one end of that continuum, I think, is um, a sort of common understanding of love, which is the desire to be intimate with, to get close to grow in intimacy with a person, with the natural world, with experience, maybe with a subject matter that you love very deeply. And the link, I think, between knowing and loving is exactly in that knowing becomes a way of understanding and thereby entering into a more intimate experience with whatever the loved one may be, um, human or otherwise. At the other end of the continuum, without trying to tick off all the stops in between, at the other end of the continuum is a definition of love that comes from Rainer Maria Rilke, that I've always loved. He said, "Love is this, that two solitudes border, protect, and salute one another." That's a quote from his book, Letters to a Young Poet. And I think it's a brilliant insight in that you know and both can be true at the same time. I think in a good loving relationship between partners, um, human partners, there's both this desire for intimacy and an absolute need to to border, protect, and salute the other person's solitude. Because when we don't do that, that intimacy becomes segues into a desire to fix and save and mold and shape the other in a way that's not at all loving, but that maybe fits our comfort zone uh, better. That's an old story, isn't it, in intimate relationships, that we get to a point of destroying the intimacy by trying to alter the other person in ways that make us more comfortable. So it love, I think, partakes in the essential nature of paradox that we were talking about earlier. And when you don't hold those poles together, both of them devolve into um, unhealthy uh, forms of themselves.
That reminds me when you were depressed that you didn't want advice and people trying to fix you and all of this. That's a kind of related to what you're saying too, that maybe love was what was holding you. And when you felt it was when the people just were also there holding it, right? Or even maybe with touch or whatever, but somehow just not what you just described with holding the solitude.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. There was this one person who really broke through in a way no one else did, a man a little older than me, a friend who came to my house every afternoon when I was in deep depression and in a very he had asked my permission, of course, and I trusted him enough to do it, to say yes. I would sit in a easy chair in my living room. He would take off my shoes and socks, and for half an hour he'd massage my feet. And he'd very rarely say anything. He was a deeply intuitive man who occasionally would say, I can feel your struggle today, but nothing else. Or I feel you getting a little stronger, nothing else. But he was there every day with having found the one place in my body where I could feel a connection with another human being. Somehow intuitively knew that and had the courage to walk into a situation that most people try to avoid, as if a depressed person were contagious, and instead be present to me in a very non-analytical, non-judgmental way, connecting me with the human race in a way that I think really helped save my life. So I think let that stand as testimony to some of those simple ways we can love by practicing presence that is unafraid of whatever's going on with the other person, and that's aimed purely at supporting them in a way that can be curative.
Thank you for sharing that. That is exactly that's a lot of what we've been talking about right there, that paradox, but also that beyond the humiliation and the humbleness even, it's I often wonder, knowing that story from your writing, how he knew and how we get to a place where we can do that for each other,
Yeah. And I don't know, but I do know that having had it modeled has made a huge difference to me.
And to a lot of people. He's helped a lot of people from that act.
Yeah. His name was Bill Tabor, and bless his memory, he died a few years ago.
Well, bless Bill for giving, and I'm sure will continue giving. Yeah, I think let's just let that be because that's powerful. Is there anything else that comes to mind, or anything that you want to express, please?
Well, I would just one final thing, Andrea. I've done a lot of interviews, as you can imagine, and this is one of the very finest I have ever experienced.
Oh.
I'm so grateful for the homework you did and for your not only attention to what I wrote, but your way of having internalized it and coming to the conversation with your own authenticity, which I hope has also evoked mine. It would be a mild thing to say I've enjoyed it tremendously. I have, but there's more. I've learned from it. I think I will grow from it. And I just want to thank you very profoundly for your investment in this and for inviting me to be with you this way.
Thank you, Parker, for saying that. That means really a lot to me, and to connect back to that first part of the conversation, that life that we are, that we're sharing, that we're uniquely giving, it means so much. It's so important, right? These things we create and give to one another. So
yes, absolutely. The world is in great need of exchanges of this sort and connections of this sort. And I'll just say that if you'd ever like to talk again, I'd be delighted to do it, and also to wish you and yours the very best in all that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Parker. I really appreciate you. And yeah, let's talk again. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.